Let's start talking here about Cam Ward, who is, at this point, as we are recording this, we're taping this, he's the presumptive number one overall pick. So we can kind of frame the discussion around that. But before we get into just like him going number one overall and how he might fit with the Titans or any other NFL team, like walk me through Cam Ward as a prospect, strengths, weaknesses, player comparisons. If you're watching this on YouTube right now, you've got a great graphic up here. Some of the analysis from Lance Zierlein of the NFL Network, player comparisons from our own guys here, Charles McDonald and Nate Tice, with a great big board up on yahoosports.com. So Charles, walk me through the strengths and weaknesses, the overall profile of Cam Ward.
Oh man, Cam Ward is fun. He's a fun guy to watch. I think that was true during the season. It's certainly true, like kind of coming back through his film, for draft stuff that we've been working on. And what I like about him is, he's aggressive, man. And he's not afraid to maybe play out of structure, try to take those chances, because the thing is, like, when you're a team like Miami who has like national championship aspirations last season, but maybe not a national championship caliber defense, the onus kind of goes on Ward, who came in as a big transfer from Washington State, to actually get us across the finish line. And boy, did he try. Which is what I really have come to respect about his game. And it's kind of like, I don't know if like controlled chaos is the right word, because there are some plays where you're like, whoa, dude, like, you got to speed up your process here a little bit. But I do think he's pretty good at taking calculated risks within like what's possible for his physical framework. He's got a pretty big arm. I think he's got great deep accuracy. I think some of his best plays when he's like on the move and thrown to the back of the end zone, which can be really tough throws to make. Didn't have a whole lot of interceptions. I think, maybe he opened himself up to some hits that you probably want to see decreased at the next level. But when you're talking about a guy who's willing to take chances down the field, who's accurate down the field, and doesn't really have any hesitation about, oh, maybe I messed up this time, I'm going to be, a little regressive and go into a shell. No, he's just going to keep firing down the field. And I really respect that about his game. He's, I think sometimes when you look at guys who play like him, you're like, oh man, you're doing all of this after the snap. Maybe you don't know what's going on before the snap. But no, I think most of the time he's pretty good at understanding like where his leverage is going to be, where his receivers are going to be open. Sometimes he just chooses the harder option. But like when things are going well for him, I think he's a really dynamic talent. And just because he decides to play out of structure sometimes doesn't mean that he can't play in structure. It's just kind of his DNA. You'll see. We'll see if it's something that works out for him at the next level or not.
Yeah, I kind of equate him to a little bit of like a wild stallion quarterback, right? Where you might have to rein him back in, but he has all of the like traits and attributes that you'd want in a high-end quarterback. And I'd frankly rather have that than a guy that has the tools or maybe doesn't have the tools that you need to push to be aggressive. I love the way he attacks downfield. I think he's a really fun deep passer, as you mentioned. And I'm glad you brought up the processing point about his game, because I thought from a pre-snap perspective, he actually, to me, looks like he's making the right calls and the right decisions. And that alone is something like, okay, if we're going to plop him into an NFL offense day one, which if he goes number one to the Tennessee Titans, he is definitely doing. I mean, the quarterbacks on their roster right now are Will Levis, and they signed Brandon Allen, who's like a QB3 in the NFL. Will Levis is a guy who might get traded at some point, I think, especially if they end up going with Cam Ward. I would bet that Will Levis is not on the roster. So if we're going to plop him in day one into this Titans offense, it's not a great situation necessarily. Like, we're showing the graphic on YouTube right now, and like Treylon Burks' name is on here. I definitely think if we're looking back at our old draft takes, Charles, we were right to be a little lower than consensus on Treylon Burks. That's not a guy you want on the field. Like, they're going to need some other answer at outside wide receiver besides Van Jefferson and Burks. But Ridley's a solid starter. They obviously added to the offensive line in free agency Dan Moore, Kevin Zeitler. That's been kind of the big signal that they are going to go quarterback here at this pick. Two reliable running backs that I like a lot. Chigokwonkwo is kind of like a tease at tight end, but somebody that I think can play. If he's going to start day one for the Titans, I think that pre-snap ability of his that you highlighted is going to be critical.
Well, yeah. And I think when you look at this group, it could be worse, right? Like, there are a lot worse situations that we see number one picks walk into, and you're like, oh man, we ain't got nothing. Even if you look back, like Trevor Lawrence with the Jaguars a few years ago with Urban Meyer and all that mess. Like it can always be worse. But I think, Nate and I touched on this last week on Football 301 with the Titans after they signed Dan Moore and Kevin Zeitler. This is, it may not be a whole bunch of A-plus starters on the offensive line, but you've got, a bunch of B starters, which might make you an A offensive line. In comparison to the rest of the league, where you see teams where guys maybe have one starter and four guys who don't play very well, or maybe like two mismatched starters and the other three guys are struggling. So I think that this is kind of a nice setup for him. At least it's just like a team that has the number one pick, earned the number one pick. They weren't good last year. You at least are going to give yourself a chance with this offensive line, I think, which is what he's going to need because like we said before, he does like to take chances and hang back there and try to give guys a chance to get open, which might be necessary with Jefferson and Burks if those are your two of your three starting receivers coming this fall. But he also does the best way I can put it is like kind of struggling with object permanence sometimes back there, where he'll evade a defensive lineman, but that guy's still on the field, right? Like he's still chasing you. So just because you got away from him the first time doesn't mean that he's not coming around for a second time. You can't just hang back there for 3-4 seconds. But this setup gives you a chance. And I think that especially moving Latham back to the right side, where he played at Alabama, will probably give him a big boost. So, some work to do at wide receiver, but you got one dude, you got two solid running backs, solid offensive line. Could be worse.
It could be worse. And let's be honest, we're bad about projecting situations. I mean, how often last year did people say, oh, Caleb Williams is walking into and I'm sure I was guilty of it, like walking into the best situation we've ever seen for a number one overall pick because they had three talented receivers. Well, turns out they couldn't design a pass game to save their lives, and the interior of the offensive line was a big problem that exacerbated Caleb Williams' weaknesses. And I actually think that Ward and Williams actually share some of the same flaws, Charles, and you can heat check me on this if you think I'm wrong about it, but I think they're sometimes a little bit too willing to hang in the pocket and even when things are there, like sometimes you just got to take the layups. And I think Williams really struggled with that in the NFL, especially, and it was, again, exacerbated by a poorly designed passing game by Shane Waldron, where routes didn't really work off of each other. Again, the interior of the offensive line was a problem. I think the Titans, to their credit, have set Ward, if he's the pick, up with a really nice offensive line, also like a big offensive line too, from Cushenberry at center all the way over there to Latham at right tackle. And there's a little bit of ifs we got to do here. If Kevin Zeitler doesn't fall off the cliff, if J.C. Latham takes a step forward after a pretty rough rookie year on the other side of the offensive line, they're going to be able to run the ball really well, I think, actually, with Pollard and Tajay Spears back there. I actually was sneaky impressed with some of the run game in Tennessee last year when Pollard was really cooking. Ended up being a really nice fantasy pick, actually, and I think he could be again this year if Ward just increases the ceiling of the offense. But that's a big offensive line that should keep this offense in better down and distance situations, certainly than what we got out of the 2024 Chicago Bears.
Yeah, it's I think they're a little different in the sense. We'll backtrack to like when they were prospects, because I think Caleb went through a thing last year where, and Nate's pointed this out too, where it's just like he was like almost trying to play too perfect sometimes, and just didn't have perfect situations, and it's like, dude, you were the number one pick for a reason. Like, go out there and do your thing. If we kind of got you, it's for we have a quarterback who can make some plays in adverse situations. And it almost seemed like he was trying to play a little bit too by the book, but that wasn't really the case at USC. I think he was a little bit more willing to let it rip and, kind of show off the arm talent. So I think, I don't think Kim Ward's arm is where Caleb's was at USC, but like prospects, there is like some similarity to, we're going to hang back here. We're going to try and make a play. And on a college field, more often than not, I'm going to be physically talented enough, to get done what I want to get done. I just hope for Cam's sake, he keeps that in the NFL, because that's what's going to make him, worthy of being the number one overall pick. Anyone can go back there and, drop back and just run the play exactly as it's called. And sometimes you pick up like 3 yards of pass, but we've seen over the past few years what separates the top quarterbacks in the league from the rest of the pack is being able to go and make plays outside of structure, being able to go and make plays that other quarterbacks couldn't dream of making. And I think that Cam needs to kind of keep that, because it's going to be what lets him, unlock the best of his abilities to the NFL.
To be honest, man, it felt a lot like Caleb Williams was a young quarterback being kind of overly constricted by a defensive head coach last year, with a guy that knew his defense was good in Matt Eberflus. Like, that defense was the reason, or at least it should have been. That defense was the reason that he kept that job, right? And it's like, just, hey, Caleb, just stay on the tracks and like don't make any mistakes. This is a guy you've got to lean into the volatility because he can open things up for you offensively. No matter what happens with Cam Ward, like, he is, even if this scenario that we're painting here, that he's a Tennessee Titan, even if that doesn't come to pass and they're just kind of leaking out to the media, like, yeah, we want Cam Ward because they want to get the Browns to trade up one spot. They want to get the Giants to trade up a couple of spots and still stay in that top 3. He's going to be playing for an offensive-minded head coach. And I do think that matters, right? Like, I think that matters in a guy for Cam Ward that, like, okay, let's lean into a little bit of that volatility. And especially, again, if you're Brian Callahan, who at times had smoke coming out of his ears because of what Will Levis was doing on the field. Now, again, I'm not saying that Cam Ward's not going to make mistakes. He obviously will make mistakes, maybe not quite as cartoonish of mistakes as a guy like Will Levis will, but like, this is somebody who's going to actually open up and activate some of the things on your offense that were clearly not activated last year. I think that playing for an offensive-minded head coach really is going to matter here for Cam Ward. So, again, just in context of who he is as a prospect, Charles, you have him ranked 8th overall in the class on the big board that you guys have on Yahoo Sports right now. Put him in context with maybe like last year's quarterback class. I don't know if this really matters, but again, we had 6 guys go in the top 12 last year. We had Caleb Williams, we had Jaden Daniels, we had Drake May, we had your boy Michael Penix, we had JJ McCarthy and Bo Nix. So where, like, in that spectrum, where does Ward maybe fit in that group of guys?
QB4, probably,
okay,
behind Williams, May, Daniels, but I would put him before Penix and McCarthy and Bo Nix. So I think that he's shown enough to be worthy of the number 1 overall pick. I don't know if I see like super elite starter for Cam Ward, but he could be a top 10 quarterback, which ultimately would make him worthy of a number 1 pick most years. I think last year, and I'm still bullish on the class that we got last year. Last year was kind of special. I don't really think there's any reason to be all that like down on really any of the guys that were drafted last year. So for him to be QB4, I don't really view that as a slight. It's just more last year was kind of a special class, and now he gets to trailblaze on his own path as the likely number 1 pick. And I think it makes a whole lot of sense. Travis Hunter is enticing. We talk about him at the combine. If you can find a player who's top 10 wide receiver, top 10 cornerback, that's probably going to be the best player in the draft just by default. But this is a potential franchise quarterback. And I think his talent merits it.
Yeah, I think that's why the Titans have ultimately just decided, again, seemingly like he's going to end up being the first pick. I'll just say before we finish this up here, just from like a fantasy perspective, dynasty perspective, we're showing the 204 rushing yards on the screen we just did. Like, he's not somebody that's going to come in and be, like the rushing cheat code, right? Like, I don't think he's that type of runner. I do think he like is a functional scrambler. I think he's a functional in pocket mobility type of player. I don't think we're going to get any like pre-draft workout measurables or anything like that. Although not that totally means anything. Like, again, your guy Michael Penix blazed that like 4.5 last year, and I don't think he's ever going to.
I think it was 4.4.
It was a 4.4, which was didn't see that one coming. Did not see that one coming.
Still haven't seen it coming. Still haven't seen it.
Still haven't seen any real manifestation about it, and that's kind of what I'm saying here with Cam Ward. Like, I do think his preference is to hang in there and push it downfield, which, again, from like a cheat code rushing fantasy perspective, that's not going to necessarily going to give you what you want, but he might be the type of guy that could make this Tennessee Titans offense maybe if not in year 1, maybe in year 2, a little bit more interesting. So he's more from like a fantasy perspective interesting in what he's going to do for the players around him, as opposed to being like an individual fantasy starter himself early on in his career. Before we throw to break here, Charles, the people love comps. They love and they hate comps. Do you have any just kind of comparables, maybe ceiling floor comp for a guy like Cam Ward?
Man, the floor, maybe someone like Jameis, like if he just ends up like a turnover machine, that could still, end up being like, I guess, like a fastball backup quarterback would be the floor if things really, really go wrong. The ceiling, though, I think I was talking to our buddy Derek Class this morning. I'm just gonna steal his comparison because I kind of like it. He said it's kind of like a bigger Kyler Murray, maybe a more sturdy version of Kyler Murray, not the top end speed, but just how they operate as passers in terms of kind of willing to take their time and take chances. But when they need to operate in structure, it can work. So the Steve McNair comps I get from a play style perspective, but I don't know. Steve McNair, that's a pretty high bar to reach. And Steve was also just like a powerhouse athlete, I think, in a way that Cam is not. But I do see it from a passing perspective. But I think big Kyler Murray, maybe less athletic Steve McNair in that range, which sounds like a number 1 overall pick to me. I mean, Kyler Murray might not be a top 5 quarterback, but he's certainly good enough to validate his status as the number 1 pick a few years ago.
Steve McNair was listed at 6'2", 220. I feel like he was bigger than that. He played like a
By the end of his career, he was definitely bigger than that, for sure.
Yeah. For sure, by the end of his career, he was definitely bigger than that. But yeah, he was obviously rest in peace, Steve McNair. He was a really fun player to watch, kind of when we were growing up. So yeah, man, I really like the Cam Ward comparison there from a Kyler Murray perspective. I'll share one just again. If you're ripping off Derek Klassen, the former quarterback charter for us at Reception Perception, or the guy currently doing that for us is Corey Kinnan. He's got a great profile up on Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders on the site. He said that like worst case scenario, he could see like a BYU Zach Wilson type of thing with Cam Ward. And I do think there are some reasons to kind of make that comparison. But again, that's like a worst case scenario. Look, Zach Wilson, it just got his 3rd NFL gig here. So again, like a volatile backup that moves around the league. I think that's possible for Cam Ward, but that Kyler Murray comparison, I think, is interesting as well.
Yeah. I'm still trying to figure out like a great comp for him because I don't even think Jameis is like it's not quite the same like the same style of risk. Because Jameis is just blind firing sometimes.
Blind risk, yeah.
Yeah. But I don't think Cam is quite there. But like the worst, like most exasperated version of him could play something like that. But high end comp, Kyler Murray, Steve McNair on that wavelength. Obviously Cam's a good deal bigger than Kyler Murray. But we're talking about play styles from the pocket.